This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. We're only a couple of weeks away from Christmas time. Jingle, jingle. Wonder what St. Nick is putting under your tree. But for those NBA players, man, they're just getting themselves ready for December 25th. That's right. That's when it all goes down, baby. We're finally there saying, all right, that time of the year. But a lot of headlines taking place over the course of the week. And you know I got to roll out the red carpet to discuss these things. So let me go ahead and bring on my peoples. www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC, my brother from another mother, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Holla back at me, Mr. Shaw. Hey, man, I know you got a big gift. Not happening Christmas, but a month away from now, a month's time frame from now. So, you know what I'm saying? I think it's only proper you get your licks in with these NBA players.
It is about time, and it's always good for that. But yeah, man, the nuptials are about a month or so away from us, so we're excited about that for sure. But before that, obviously, a lot of NBA content to get to before we actually go off the grid here for a little bit as I go on a voyage to get married and all that. So salute to all the fans listeners of NBA Baseline, man. We're excited about this week's show, about this NBA season, about all the things coming up the rest of this regular season.
Most definitely. I mean, yeah, you're so excited. You're just stumbling over the end of your thought, man. I like it. I'm all with that.
Yeah, you know,
as Coolio would say, you're getting ready for a fantastic voyage. But let us get you guys ready for a good, fantastic voyage. We got a great show lined up for you. If a lot of people haven't figured out what's been going on, man, the Chicago Bulls have decided to make a move. We'll talk about that in our segment of the breakdown. And also in the drop, interesting topic that we decided to kind of dig in a little bit, the unwritten rules of the NBA. You know what I'm saying? You know, these things are not etched in scroll. They aren't part of the 10 crack commandments, like my man Biggie would say. But there clearly are rules that are not spoken, but are definitely felt and heard. Are they ridiculous? Have we gone a little too far? And when you break those rules, how much of a grudge do you really hold against that player, against that team? We'll dig into that in our subject of the drop. Of course, I covered it coast to coast where we discuss the news happening in the association. So once again, we'd like to thank everybody for tuning into the Baseline NBA podcast. Be sure to get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA. Get at me at GameFace Lee. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. Available on all the major platforms. So we always encourage you to dig in, download that platform. Kick back, relax, allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things happening in the association. And for our Dash listeners, be sure to catch us every Tuesday morning, your morning ride, getting you ready for the week of the NBA. You know how we do, and you know how we roll. It's time now for the breakdown. Time to break it down. Time now for the breakdown. Callie Warren Shaw, the Baseline NBA podcast, and the main topic of conversation this week on the breakdown is regarding the state of play with the Chicago Bulls. Earlier this week, if people hadn't figured out, Chicago Bulls decided to make a move. Not a player move, but a personnel move. Gar Forman and company decided to say, hey, Fred, we appreciate the time that you've put in, but I think it's time that the Chicago Bulls decide to move in a different direction. The maligned head coach, who basically compiled a 115-155 record with the Chicago Bulls, finally parts ways 3 years and maybe a quarter of the NBA season. And I don't know how you want to put this within context. I think maybe you have to read between the tea leaves to truly understand the logic in this. What I find remarkable about the Chicago Bulls, once again, is just the justification for how they do things. And while I agree that the Chicago Bulls and Fred Hoiberg, I think, was 1 year too many of a relationship, I just find it, again, just totally disingenuous to let go of a head coach only a quarter of a season in. But it seems like this is the new norm now, you know, and if you're going to do it in some obscure fashion, which maybe lends to the idea that since the Bulls are so irrelevantly bad, that nobody will be shook by this. I just think that it just sends a really awkward message about the state of play with coaches and the relationships that they truly need to have in the course of a year to prevent things like this from happening.
Yeah, I think there was some ugliness, to the letting go of Hoiberg here, and then the reasons behind it, maybe not as valid as I think maybe they could have been, given a different time. It's like This guy, unfortunately, you can say what you want about him, but he didn't have his full roster. Levine was finally healthy this year, but Chris Dunn was not. Laurie Markkinen was not to begin the year, and then Bobby Portis went down at some point. So three key components of what they're hoping to be their building block in their futures weren't ready to rock. And then you had a rookie starting at center, and they were doing the right thing by starting him and giving him the minutes there. So it's interesting when they say, okay, well, this team is just not moving in the direction that we thought they would. Well, what the F were you expecting? Like it's insane to think that Hoiberg should have been had this team at a better pace than what they were playing at, especially with all the injuries that they had. Now, again, you can say that maybe he lost a locker room and things of that nature, but I don't know that that's really the case, especially with this year's franchise. And I think if this is a move, it's one of those things that it probably should have happened before the season started. If you weren't happy or enamored with Hoiberg as your guy leading this young group, now you bring back in Jim Boylan, who's been with the franchise forever and has been in an interim role with this team before as well too. And, not to jump too far ahead, but he's already having problems. They got trounced by the Celtics, over the weekend. And Zach LaVine is like, listen, what the F? Why weren't we in there? And so he's feeling already like there's already a disconnect that. And then you're hearing that Boylan came in and is now making them run suicides and all this, typical garbage and BS that I don't think is really going to fix anything. So in short, I think Hoiberg got a bad deal, but I think it really stems from up top and what Foreman and Paxson's expectations were, unrealistic expectations for this team were going to be.
Yeah, I mean, as I look at what's happened with the Chicago Bulls, what really gets to me is that there's still a lack of accountability in what the true focus and direction of the Chicago Bulls should be post the Tom Thibodeau era. And I guess, this kind of falls in line, if you even want to take this back when the Chicago Bulls and in the era of Jerry Krause struggled to figure out who they wanted to be, what they wanted to be after the Phil Jackson era. Now, I'm not saying Tom Thibodeau and Phil Jackson's accomplishments and achievements, there should be any form of comparison. What I am saying is that when you make these type of incremental decisions, whether it be from a head coach or to a player, you have got to be solidified and focused at staying the course so that not only your organization and not only the players, but the fans can feel some sense of belonging to what your purpose or your intent is. And this has just not been what's happening with the Chicago Bulls. I mean, listen, you can make the argument that Jimmy Butler no longer wanted to be a part of this rocky boat, and you went ahead and you sent him, and then you bring back assets like a Zach LaVine and a Chris Dunn and things of that nature. But what do you do with those players? And don't tell me, well, that's up to the head coach, Fred Hoiberg. No, that's up to the organization, because ultimately you're supplying the head coach with the personnel that he needs to have for his system that you bought into. You bought into the innovation of Hoiberg and the fact that he could coach up the young guys coming out of Iowa State. And up to this point, I don't think that the Bulls organization has done him justice in that regard. Now, I will say, to the fairness of the Chicago Bulls, they did give Fred Hoiberg an ample opportunity. You did have a playoff-laden basketball team that I think underachieved in many respects. But I also don't think that the organization truly had Hoiberg's best interest at heart. If they did, some of the moves that they had made in the offseason, bringing in some players, infusing themselves with the whole drama with Dwayne Wade, which I utterly thought was just not good at all, and basically made the Bulls organization look like a bunch of clowns and still don't know what they're doing. All of that stuff, I think, does come into play. Do I think you fire everybody across the board? No, but you certainly don't tell me that by firing Fred Hoiberg a quarter of into this season, that it was going to somehow improve things. And then you get in front of cameras, like Paxson and Gar Foreman and these guys trying to justify, oh, well, it's not just he didn't have it with the individuals. It's also about how he does it with the team. All right, if that's how you want to play this, but certainly people now understand that it's never been just about Fred Hoiberg.
No, and you're right. I think just not being able to, but letting him go one game after Markkinen returns, right? And this is what your quote unquote hope to be the franchise player is. One game back, you brought him off the bench so you can kind of get his legs under him, and they're like, all right, good, that's it. It's just the timing of it makes no plausible sense whatsoever for the Bulls organization. And I feel like, Foreman and Paxson, they're gonna continue to get passes because they've been pseudo successful despite themselves in a lot of ways. Like, as you alluded to, some of the roster moves, some of the trades haven't worked out. But again, the Butler trade, you can say it did work out. They got three assets out of that, and 3 building blocks for their team moving forward. And the fact this franchise has been in the playoffs 8 out of the last 10 years, now probably going to be 8 out of the next 11 years after this season is concluded, it kind of buys them the equity to say, I was like, all right, well, it's not Foreman and Paxson because look what they've done. Those teams have gotten to the playoffs. The rosters they've built have done so. So it's easy to kind of point at the coach and say that they're going to be the fall guy, as it is in many situations. But this is a team, this is a franchise that has many questions about its overall direction, how it wants to play. And I really don't feel like Jim Boylen, as seasoned as he is, and whatever you want to say, all the accolades you can heap upon him, I don't think he's the guy for this job. So now you're going to have him coach the last 58, 60 games. And then what development is going to come out of that? That to me is what's very perplexing. It's like, I feel like Hoiberg should have at least maybe finish out the season with the entire roster together and see, okay, are there strides that take place? Does Chris Dunn, learn how to be a better point guard in the system, in year 3 now or year 4? Does Zach LaVine, with everybody there, does he now become more facilitator as a guy to just a volume shot maker? Does Lauri Markkanen learn how to be more efficient? These are the things that you need to evaluate. Is Bobby Portis really going to be a part of your future? And I don't think Jim Boylen is going to be the guy to kind of get that done. I think he's just going to be the figurehead, the talking head, and whatever Foreman and Paxson want them to do, all right, do this, and then that may end up rubbing some players the wrong way.
You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA as we are covering our conversation regarding the firing of Fred Hoiberg earlier during the week, or basically you could say the earliest part of December that you can think of. So listen, to your point, Shaw, Jim Boylen is the interim's interim, right? He again is just another fix, another patch to the hole in the dike, essentially. And what I really think doesn't resonate with, the logic that goes into this is when you have a situation like this, what does this say to other players who will become free agents and want to have a sense of identity through playing with a organization or a franchise? I tend to feel like there's this misconception where people get this perception that, basketball players, when they become free agents, it's really about the money. I don't think a lot of people really understand it's not just about the money. It's about the market. It's about the organization. It's about the environment. It's about, the idea of, what will their family be like in this community, in this area. And if basketball is being highly regarded, right, in a city like Chicago, you can't tell me that Gar Forman and Jim Paxson are selling anybody who becomes marquee free agents or even mid-level free agents, that there is a sense of desire to come and play for the Chicago Bulls because of this. This is the kind of move that if you do not immediately go and find whoever it is that you decided to fire Fred Hoiberg for, you do yourself a disservice going into the offseason and for years beyond. Because no matter what you do, if you're not going to develop the talent that you went through all this trouble to bring in and fire a head coach over, then what is the purpose of you thinking that you're actually building a championship basketball team? Because we've often said, Shaw, that the road to most of these traditional basketball teams like the Boston Celtics, the Los Angeles Lakers, the New York Knicks, it has always been about the talent that you initially draft, the building block, that one player, that Larry Bird, that Magic Johnson, that Patrick Ewing. You start there. You get that guy. He becomes the face. He becomes the image of that team. And then you get those missing pieces, whether you get them through free agency or you get them through, what you would call them, launch shot picks in the draft. The Chicago Bulls came in this era where they had that player in Michael Jordan, but they also did it again when they got Scottie Pippen. And then from there, after they got the run at the peak of their talents, they decided to go into free agency and pick up the Dennis Rodmans, right? And get guys like Will Perdue and you know what I'm saying? So in Bill Wennington. Like this is the kind of thing that I feel the Chicago Bulls are missing. They keep doing things in short segments, but they don't seem to do it with full on effort and commitment.
Well, it's interesting because you wonder now, okay, who is the face of this franchise? So the Bulls, in some ways, have been unceremoniously derailed by Derrick Rose. So they drafted him, brought him in, and he was a lightning rod and sparked this franchise. A year or so later, they get Thibodeau into play, and it just takes off. And he is an MVP, and everything is going well. And then, the knee injuries start. So their next franchise player, unceremoniously, like I said, got injured, and they haven't really recovered since that time. They end up drafting a guy like Jimmy Butler late, and he ends up working himself into being one of the best two-way players, best NBA players in the game. But then grind and his personality starts to grate on the organization as well too, and they have to trade him as well. So two opportunities to have potential building blocks, and for different reasons, it doesn't go the way that they've wanted it to. And in some ways, here's where I not say let's necessarily let them off the hook, but I understand what's happened because they've had those things in place. They had Rose, they had Butler, even Carlos Boozer. I mean, like those are like kind of supplemental parts that you're alluding to, like for maybe even the Chicago Bulls days or whatever, right? But it's interesting because Joakim Noah as well. Because all of a sudden when it derails, you feel like, okay, well, we're right there. We're victims of circumstance. And why should we have to rebuild? And that's kind of where they were. And I think even more so, like right when Hoiberg came in, that was probably an opportunity to really kind of tear things down. And they were like, but we still got Jimmy, and so maybe we can turn this thing around. Jimmy's an all-star type of talent. So we can just maybe bring some other pieces around. And they were tantalized by that and didn't really see the future as to say, all right, well, we need to tear this whole thing down. And at some point, well, then they did. They did trade Jimmy Butler. And after the Wade and the Rondo and all that stuff didn't work itself out. But now you're kind of like, all right, well, you have these pieces, you have these young guys, but none of them are elite. I think Boy Markin is going to be a very, very good basketball player. And I said earlier, yeah, they're probably going to be looking to build the team around him some. But is he like a Porzingis? And some people could say Porzingis is not a guy you can build around. And some people would say that. So I don't know, but I really do feel like this team has had some interesting luck, some decisions that they did on their own that were definitely crappy. And all of it has kind of put them into this position where right now where they don't have a full head on direction. And like, what kind of coach is Jim Boylan? Like, what is he going to do for these young guys? That is the biggest thing, the outlier from all this right now. I feel like you fired Hoiberg, and I think you should have had a better plan in place before you made that decision.
I have a quick question for you. What do you think really did in Fred Hoiberg? I look at some of the quotes that were provided, and you can go on any media outlet to read into this. I'm going by what I read from the Chicago Tribune and the quotes that they got from the Bulls organization, and basically said, this decision wasn't based on our record. We were in a similar situation last year, poor record, but the entire energy about this group was different then. You have to be able to get your identity across the team. And look, this sounds so generically bad, right? I want to look at specifically where Hoiberg missed the mark, because then my follow-up question for you, Shaw, is, does Fred Hoiberg coach again in the NBA, or is he best well suited to be recoaching again back in college basketball? He missed the mark on Nikola Mirotic, okay? there's no reason why Nikola Mirotic should be dropping 30 points per game with the New Orleans Pelicans, but he couldn't give you anything on the Chicago Bulls team. This is the same team that wound up in the playoffs when they had this dude. Bobby Portis, exciting young player coming out the box this rookie season. You couldn't do anything with this kid. And these two guys had to come to blows before it became relevantly clear that you had no handle of this basketball team, right? Taj Gibson. How many years did you have Taj Gibson? And listen, you know how I feel about Taj Gibson. I think just way overrated. But when there was an opportunity that you should have been playing more Mirotic and less Gibson, and having Gibson coming off the bench, being more of a role player. Like, I guess to me, I'm just curious from your perspective, Shaw, where did Hoiberg miss the mark on players on that or personnel that he had access to that we now seeing are either flourishing elsewhere or are not getting where you would think that they should be at this point if you were still playing under Hoiberg?
Well, I don't know if it's all his fault. I
I'm
think
not
it's
saying
somewhere
that it's
in
his
between.
fault, but I'm saying if you're going by what these guys are saying, Garmin, and Paxson, and they're not saying that it's individual, which I don't buy. I do think that there was individual situations and relationships of players and what they did and didn't do that I think that was part of Hoiberg's demise. I want to figure out from your perspective, who did they miss the mark? Who did he miss the mark on? Who did he not get right? Who did he not play more of when you watch the Chicago Bulls play during the tenure of Fred Hoiberg?
Yeah, well, I don't know if there's a direct answer to that. I think it's more a lot of it is style of play. And when they hired Hoiberg, they knew kind of what he was and what he was about. So the fact that he wanted to run a more up tempo system, in a couple seasons ago, they gave him, Wade and Rondo, in the declining years and not in the people who can't really play in that type of space. That's not on him. So then he had to try to figure that out. And I'm not letting him off the hook, for his developmental skills and things of that nature as well. But I really do feel like style and the fit weren't never really a match. And then when they moved off of that, well, then you started to see them not necessarily play better, but it started to become his system again. And what we saw last year, well, they didn't have Levine for the good majority of it. When he came back, he wasn't right. Um, and again, he's a big piece to what they want to do offensively, especially offensively, right? So to me, what it boils down to is that Hoiberg was a victim more so of the organization, not truly, as you alluded to, not really having an identity. And then what he wanted to do for the organization didn't fit one way or the other. And I think the young players that have been there, because they've been in and out of lineup as well too, that continuity has just never been able to be established. So how can you fault a guy with Nicole Mirotic is getting his face broken in by one of his own players and Bobby Portis, and then, well, he decides that he wants to be out of there, and again, Levine has been out and Chris Dunn has been in and out of lineup as well, too, with injuries and things of that nature. They trade for, Cameron Payne for whatever reason, because they feel like he could be useful. It's just been a mixed match of what the Bulls want to do, what Hoiberg's capable of doing, and it all comes to an end. And the one thing I'll say in kind of closing is, like, as we're sitting here watching, only you have to, when I put this in air quotes, you have to default to the general managers, and the people in charge of the organization. Only they can really look and see, okay, that guy's not playing hard. And if that's what it boils down to, Hoiberg wasn't getting people to play hard, the effort and the energy wasn't there, then you're right. Then maybe he lost the voice in the locker room and people weren't gunning for him. But it's interesting to say that with a team that is still only so talented anyway, and I just don't know what the expectations could have been.
Do you think he coaches in the NBA again?
No, I don't. I really feel like if he has a role in the NBA, it's probably maybe in a front office somewhere, maybe some type of player development type of thing. So I guess that could be considering the coaching position. So as a head coach, no, maybe as an assistant somewhere else, but he may lick his wounds and just go back to college. And again, he's a stand-up guy. He's a hell of a person. And I feel like he'll work in basketball again. I just don't know what capacity the NBA, if at all. But I think he can definitely find another coaching job in college if he wanted to.
All right. Well, Fred Hoiberg has a 5-year, $25 million contract that runs through next season. That is expected to be fully guaranteed, which ultimately would mean that he'll still be getting paid by Chicago Bulls until he lands another gig. It's an interesting thought, but I'm going to end it off like this. And this is from Warriors head coach Steve Kerr, who knows Fred Hoiberg, and basically he said, and I quote, Fred never had a chance without really any talent to work with to build something. Chew on that and make what you make what you will of that. You're tuned to the Baseline. Callie, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, and this was the breakdown. Time now for the drop. Callie, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast, and this week on the drop, unwritten rules of the NBA. Things you should not be doing in the presence of NBA ballers that you know will get you lit up. And it seems like this year in 2018, Shaw, in the 2019 season, some of these players, man, they're really pushing the envelope about these unwritten rules. Now, I don't know if they, you know what I'm saying, if they got a little, William Wallace in them, they got a little Braveheart in them, and they just want to just, say, buck the rules. We're going to do it, we're going to do our own thing. But so far this year, man, we've had a couple of incidents which are reflective of some of the young players in the NBA who have opted to do things, whether you think that they're right or wrong, but do make us kind of question them as being unwritten, because there's certainly not rules, legitimate rules in the NBA. For example, if you got a player that's dropping 48 and there's 10 seconds left in the game, you're already up by 20 and you're still on the basketball court, that already is an unwritten rule, because most coaches usually take their star player off the court, let him bask in the glory and the celebration. But then to allow that dude to try and jack up a shot to get him 50 in front of the face of other players, unwritten rule. Usually you don't do that. Or, going for a dunk during a 35-point blowout when you have possession of the ball rather than letting the clock run out. So these type of unwritten rules, Shaw, back in the day, there was a level of etiquette. And now it seems like some of these players are like, bump that, man. I'm trying to get my shine on. Not and as if NBA players don't get enough shine as it is in comparison to other sports genres. But is this a prevalent problem now that some of these young players are just saying, buck the rule?
Hey man, old school, new school need to learn though, and that's what it boils down to. We're in an era of new school guys trying to operate under old school rules, right? And it's just there's kind of a changing of the guard in some ways, and I feel like it's cute when it benefits you, and then it's offensive when it doesn't. So I still agree though. I think a lot of times it's on the coach too. I think these coaches, they need to be pulling their players out there. If the score is out of hand and somebody's trying to go for a milestone mark like a 50 or 40 or whatever it is, and it's interesting sometimes when it's those players who may not ordinarily do something like that. So I mean, if it's Durant and Curry and people like that, like not to say that they do it all the time, but they're more apt to get that done. If it's Lance Stevenson going for 40 or 50, well, is he really going to go for 40 or 50 ever in his life again? And I feel like there's kind of that push and pull with it, but I think you should still kind of put together. A lot of it, again, like I said, it comes down to time, place, and score. When these things are taking place, and I think basketball is one of the sports that has maybe a few amount of unwritten rules, especially when it comes to being on the floor. There's probably a lot more of the unwritten rules, off the court, in the locker room, and things of that nature, as I think that would be the case in many sports. But there's no sport like baseball that has 10,000 unwritten rules that take place on the field. But again, I think when we're talking about, time, place, and score, there's a lot of things that coaches and the players themselves can do a lot better.
All right, so let me ask you this question, right? The situation with Jamal Murray and the Denver Nuggets earlier this year, him going up, trying to drop and get 50, and Kyrie Irving taking offense to that and then taking the ball and then throwing it out there, in the stands. You made some legitimate points, right? Like, what's Kyrie Irving still doing on the basketball court? What's Jamal Murray still doing on the basketball court? Now, I can understand why, they chose to leave him on there. Clearly that is, a well-regarded achievement you don't have too many Denver Nuggets players dropping 50 unless your name was Carmelo Anthony or Allen Iverson, right? But I do think, though, that in the heat of competition, part of the problem that I do think tends to happen at times is we forget where we are in the moment of doing things. Maybe we think more about the fact that he just scored the 50 points, but to tell me that you scored your 50th point when the other team had not really given you their best defensive effort, I'm one of those type of dudes is be like, yeah, statistically, I give you your props, but
there's an asterisk.
Yeah, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's an unwritten asterisk to it. Like, did you really drop 50? Like, remember when Devin Booker dropped his 81 against the I'm not sorry, 80, what was it? Was it 80? What did he drop against the Celtics last year? I'm trying to remember what he dropped. But Devin Booker basically dropped an affluent, amount of points on the Celtics. And
you mean 70?
The 70. There you go. I'm sorry, not 80. I'm thinking Kobe. But he dropped 70 on the Celtics. And it was one thing, to give praise, to Devin Booker, right? The Celtics, however, rather than just taking it on the chin, say, yo, homie dropped, right? And he got his. It's like they couldn't let that joint go. And then it became a week-long beef about how Devin got that 70, right? And how the Celtics played defensively and everything like that. Most guys, when they get this crowning achievement, like when Kobe dropped his 81 against the Toronto Raptors, you didn't hear anybody from the Toronto Raptors trying to, malign the achievement or nothing, right? And so it's just interesting to me how dudes take, these type of achievements and the quote unquote unwritten rules in the way that you approach them because of it.
Yeah. I that specific instance, and I think is interesting because they were it was interesting because it's like, all right, well, you can say, well, he's trying to bring them back, I guess. So it's like the antithesis of kind of where it is on the opposite side, where usually the person with that accolade is on the winning team, and a lot of those times is on the winning team because they're winning by a lot. Booker's situation was different because they ended up losing that game. So, but it's interesting overall because I don't like the shine that's put on trying to get your own personal accomplishments in place and what that means. Because I do, like you said, I think it's a great point. It does become empty. There are asterisks in it. And maybe in the annals of times, 20 years from now, someone will look back and be like, oh, this guy had a 50-point game. This guy had a 70-point game. And they'll look at the score and maybe they won't even understand the context. They can't understand game and flow. But right now, here in this moment, we understand exactly what it is about Ricky Davis years ago, trying to, getting that triple double. Like, it's just, there's certain things it looks real bad, and if you're a guy who's just out there to get yours, that doesn't really resonate well, with a lot of other players, especially, and then doesn't endear you to teams outside of your own. And then maybe even on your own team, it can rub some people the wrong way. And then this is a league where nothing is promised to you. You may get traded, you may get hurt, you may get cut, something happens. Now you have to find your way back and you're another team. And now it's like, hey, well, I remember when you did this. It's kind of like, again, that unwritten rule is like, you don't want to burn bridges. And I feel like you can definitely do that if you're going out there just trying to be subservient to your own self and for your own cause. But like I said earlier, I think coaches have a bigger role to play in this than meets the eye. A lot of times they're not held on the hook. It's like, oh, well, the player is out there, and he's chucking, trying to get this, accolade. Oh, why the coach still have him out there doing that? I mean, the coach is buying into it as well.
All right, well, so let's continue on that point, Shaw, right? The Chicago Bulls and the Boston Celtics. We just talked about that just a little bit earlier on in our show, right? The Chicago Bulls suffers their worst loss ever, right? Do you think that sometimes when head coaches are watching their team, right, like a Brad Stevens watches what his Celtics team is doing to, a lowly, apathetic, just uninspired Chicago Bulls team, it ain't as if these coaches don't read the blotter and the headlines about what's going on over there. Hey, Hoiberg is on the hot seat. Hey, this guy, his days are numbered. And then you sit here and you got your boys who are obviously a much better basketball team go and run these dudes out the gym. Do you not think that maybe some of the coaches think about this a little bit? It's like, man, I want my team to go out and perform well. I need for them to feel like, they are the team that they should be. So, I need them to go out there and basically crush a team 56 points, right? But damn, I would really not want to be that guy that made it so bad that it caused the head coach for the opposing team the next day to get fired. Do you think that there's unwritten rules between the head coaches about, how they approach things once it starts getting out of hand?
Well, I think there's camaraderie, and there's a mutual respect, but it's still competition. So at the end of the day, if as one coach doesn't have his team ready to play and to compete, well, that's not on the other coach who does. That's not that coach's fault. So I think again, but it's just one of those things you have to understand game flow. So after you've gotten up by a certain number where the game is out of hand, well then all right, your starters don't need to be in there, with 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter and you're up 35. That just doesn't need to be life. You can do a better job of that. But you can't sit here and be as coaches, all right, well, I know this other guy's in trouble now. Well, I'm going to take the foot off the gas, because at the end of the day, that could be you next week. Now you could be in trouble. So there's competition, there's responsibility, but there's also respect. But at the end of the day, it comes down to, okay, we're hired to do a job, and I have to do my job. And if I do my job better than you, that's not my fault. That's on you. And now you need to go level up and get your ish together. So that's one thing I think when it comes to that overall. I do want to talk about something else though, in terms of the unwritten rules. What is your thought process on, when someone gets dunked on? I've read a nice article and researching, this topic, so to speak, and it's just.
Are we talking about Hazonia dunking on Giannis?
Well, has something to do. Okay. It has something to do with that, in general. But the kind of like it's kind of a two-parter, because dunking on people, to me, I just feel like it should never be an offensive foul. And I think in some aspects, a lot of times it truly is. So like it's like, all right, if you're a purist, like you have to follow the rules of the game. But it's like if someone just gets posterized, and they get the offensive foul called on him, it's like, oh man, it takes a lot of energy out of it. But here's a guy doing the right thing from a defensive standpoint, and he's gotten in position. Now he gets dunked on from a highlight standpoint, but he made the right defensive play. So that's something that I'm interested in. But it's interesting they talk about his Giannis thing, because definitely I do feel like, because Hazonia did it to Giannis and Giannis didn't do it to Hazonia, it was definitely perceived a lot worse. It's going back years ago. If Ty Lue would have been the one stepping over Allen Iverson, people would have been in an uproar. But because Iverson did it to Lue, it's one of the most iconic things Iverson has ever done. Perception is definitely reality, I think, when it comes to the NBA.
So let me do this. I have a serious problem. So part of the problem that I have with what happened, and we'll just use the Hazonia Antetokounmpo reference in order to explain this part of what I'm trying to say here. Part of my problem is the way that we have now enveloped the rules defensively in the NBA, right? And this actually goes back to what was happening when Blake Griffin first came on the scene. When Blake Griffin came on the scene and his impulse would be dunking on people, he basically would take his elbow or his hand and basically climb up over you and then dunk over like the tallest dudes, right? So it wasn't just a straight up get up and dunk on someone like Scottie Pippen did on Patrick Ewing, or when John Starks went and did it against Pippen and Michael Jordan, right? It wasn't a straight up go up there and dunk on somebody. Now, cats got to basically, huggy bear themselves on dudes in order to posterize a dude, which I think is bad for defensive players, because I do think that you should have the ability to defend yourself. Now, I'm not saying you should throw cheap shots, but this whole idea that you should jump straight up in order to contest a shot or else it'll be considered as a defensive foul, that's bull crap, okay? I think if somebody's going to come at you and is trying to ram that ball over you just to get to the rim, and you get a piece of that ball, and maybe you get even a piece of him, we go to the unwritten rules, you really shouldn't be calling any kind of foul. If he gets it in, he gets it in. If he doesn't, keep it moving, right? I feel like because guys defensively are kind of put in a helpless-like type situation of only going straight up rather than going up in or being a little bit more closer to physical at the height of trajectory, that puts them at a disadvantage, and that becomes a person getting posterized for no apparent reason. Because I really think that if Giannis didn't have to mentally think about only going straight up and actually had to go at Hazonia, what do you think the odds were that that the Greek Freak wouldn't have done something to that? I'm not saying that the dunk wasn't legit. I'm just saying because of what defensive players have to do at times, either to draw the offensive foul or in order to attempt to block the shot, I think it leaves way too much error for them to not be where they need to be to defend it, and for a guy offensively to get their rocks off doing a posterized dunk on them. Am I off on thinking that?
No, I don't think so. I mean, and but it's always going to be a matter of the perception of game flow, players involved, the referee, angles, all that kind of comes into play with it. But overall, I don't think it's the wrong assessment. But what is your overall take on it when it comes to the players themselves, like who does what to who? Do you feel like there is a difference in terms of what the perception is, even from the referees or even the general public, when, okay, it's me versus you doing it to me? You understand what I'm saying? Like, in terms of the higher profile player over the lower profile player.
I think if you're the higher profile player and you dunk on someone, sure, you want to bask in the glory, awesome. But you reap what you sow. So if some lowly dude named Mario Hazonia, who ain't got that rep, you know what I'm saying, ain't got that profile like Giannis Antetokounmpo, you're going to put yourself in that situation. You better damn sure block that ball, because for that lonely dude, that is his moment in the sun, and he deserves it, right? I don't think, like in this situation, I don't think Mario Hazonia was set out to say, oh, I'm now going to make my career dunking off of Giannis Antetokounmpo. And I'm also not saying that if you're Giannis, knowing that a guy like Mario Hazonia dunks on you, that it should suddenly diminish what you are as a superstar. I mean, that you should know, and you should just basically scrub that off. It happens. It happens to the best of cats. Steph Curry, right? While he jacks threes up at people's faces, I mean, we've seen we've seen him get clowned on numerous times. He got clowned on by Kyrie Irving, which is what set the name for Kyrie Irving and the conversation about why Kyrie Irving is a better point guard than Steph Curry. Although you look at the numbers and the accolades, and you still have to wonder, is that really the case? Just because he had one moment in the sun and helped Cleveland do something, that Steph Curry should just be admonished as not being one of the greatest point guards right now in the game? Come on, right? So I look at what Hazonia is doing, and I'm like, yeah. If the unfortunate circumstance is that it's Giannis Antetokounmpo, you don't sit in midair and think, oh, if I do this, am I going to ruin the rep of a great international super? Nah, man, you posterize that dude. And you know what? You bask in that glory. And if you're Giannis, when the time presents itself, if it's there, you don't hesitate. You take advantage of it and you put him back in his place. I mean, that's how it's always been in the NBA.
Yeah, competition. It should be like, hey, I'm going to go at you, and you can go at me.
Now, I will say, too, though, if you're Giannis, you ain't got to take it that far talking about I'm going to punch him in the nuts. Like, that's just not that's just not cool, man. Like, that to me. See, when Giannis does that, though, he, to me, reflects someone that's taking it too personal, right? Like, I get it. Your competitive fervor gets you going. Like, you don't want to be that dude. But you know that you're the most dominant player. There's no reason for you to talk about how you're going to punch somebody in the nuts just because you got dunked on. Like that, I just didn't think it was necessary.
No doubt. But that's what I said before. It's all about competition, and you want people to kind of go at each other and have that level of exuberance, so that even us as fans and people covering the league, we can enjoy it and have something to talk about. So when that kind of happens, and if there's a big highlight play, well, that's exactly why it's called a highlight. But I think you just have it becomes a question of sometimes whether or not a highlight does it become now disrespectful. And stepping over a guy after a dunk, yeah, it's disrespectful, but I think it's part of the game in some ways as well too. But my biggest problem with that, again, I think perception is who's doing what to who. If Giannis dunks or Hazonia and steps over him, it's the greatest meme ever since life.
Now, now, listen. No, wait. No, I don't mean to interrupt you like this, Shaw. But in all fairness, though, this is part. Let's see. Okay, back in the day, this was great, right? Because if they showed any footage of stepping on a dude and stuff like that, and this I'm going to blame ESPN, because now that everybody now gets to be on ESPN and gets to be a top 10 highlight or whatever the case may be, let's not act like some of these dudes don't do little things, right, to carve their niche so that gets on the highlight reel. It isn't as if Hazonia couldn't have slid around Giannis and just headed up the court. He made it a point when he realized that it was the Greek Freak on the ground, he made it a point to be like, I'm going to step over your long, lanky legs so that everybody knows that it was you that I dunked on, right? And I'm just saying.
Again, I have no problem with it. I just don't. And it's way I know in a lot of ways.
I'm just saying you might have to have a conversation with your young son at the All-Star weekend if he's there. I'm just be like, yo, man, it's like you have to be careful.
But it's one of those things. Like, listen, you have to understand what you're doing, right? Like,
right.
Are you going to poke the bear? And so he's like, you know what? F it, I am. So I'm gonna step right over your ass while you're on the ground and say and keep it moving and know that it's gonna become a topic of conversation. But shout out to Carl Bullitt, man, because he's the one who kind of pitched this topic to us. Our social media guy. He's like, listen, something that we should really dive into. And I want to touch on something that he brought up as well too, which kind of even sparked it all to begin with. With the Warriors specifically, ironically, the Bulls are kind of involved in this as well too, where Klay Thompson set that record for threes, and he stayed in the game basically until he did that. But again, going kind of back to a game that was out of hand, and the coach was like, apparently Kerr says he wasn't aware of what was going on. But Klay Thompson was very much aware of where it was. After he hit his 14th three, he was like, okay, now he's pulled and he's ready to come out of the game. This is a situation where had that game been close and had the opposing team be ready to play, and I guess you can never be ready to play for a 14-3 assault. I guess you can never be ready for that. But nevertheless, Klay had to be taken out, and we'll never get to know what he could have done in that game. He could have gone for 18, maybe could have gone for 23s in that game. We'll never know because the game wasn't close. When it comes down to those really truly special NBA accomplishments, not necessarily personal, because again, we were talking about it before, and there's a very, very big difference here. Lance Stevenson getting 40 points or Kevin Durant getting 50 points. Those are personal accomplishments, but it's been done before. Now we're talking about NBA records, things that have never been done before. Do you think, where does the line kind of bow, if you will, so to speak, when it comes to, okay, this is something that we've never seen in our game ever, and then it's trying to be respectful to the other team and not embarrass them?
You're never going to be able to balance that, right?
Right.
Unfortunately. And I will say, and it brings up to what we were talking about a little bit earlier about, head coaches, running other teams out of the gym, knowing that another coach might actually get fired over that situation. I mean, to your point, you said, hey, it's within the flow of competitive play. And ultimately, the team has to decide, are you going to stop the opposing team from doing whatever it is that you think that they're doing, right? So, look, you got a staff of people out there that are watching all elements of things going on in this, during the course of a basketball game. You can't tell me that they don't have access to statisticians and they don't see things that are happening in the course of a basketball game that should kind of throw up, red flares about, how you really need to approach this situation. I will say that I think head coaches are depriving us from some of these opportunities of seeing great things happening. And it's going to be a problem because I do think that NBA players may start going rogue, overdoing it. And it may be at the expense of, I don't want to say diminishing the quality, so to speak, but I think it diminishes the idea of us interpreting that the NBA is a player-driven sport, which it is. So you let the players play. So I don't like the fact that head coaches do that.
Well,
you know what I'm
let
saying?
me interrupt
That's
really
just
quickly
me. I'm
as
just
well
saying.
too, because I think in some ways too, though, then you also with that you can put your players at risk of injury because you don't know how the other team is going to perceive
all right,
that.
So let's talk about fine. So talk about the 73 win season, right? Remember when the Golden State Warriors during the latter part of the second half of the season, a lot of people were questioning whether or not they were going to be able to break that record.
I think interesting about all this is that the Warriors are involved in so much of this conversation. Even now,
which may make most of our listeners who probably hate the Warriors hate them even that much more. I understand.
Right. I mean, again, the old the old adage, did they ruin the NBA type of situation? So, when it comes to breaking a record, they were very outspoken about wanting to do so. And Kerr, while he kind of played it down, I think he wanted to be a part of history in that way as well too. And I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with that. And I do feel like, because as fans too, remember we always talk about this too, like this goes down a different rabbit hole. But as fans who purchase tickets to those games later on, it's like, all right, well, as they're going for that win, well, now because they've clinched it and they're so far ahead, it's like, okay, they don't need to be playing and you need to be resting for the playoffs. Well, those fans still want to see those guys in those later games. So the fact that, hey, they maybe have clinched their playoff spot and there's nobody can catch them, and they just now so happen to be going for a record. Well, the fans want to see that too. The fans have an opportunity to see history, but also paid money to see not Kevin Durant at that time. Other players are maybe not going to always be as understanding, so to speak, of what you're trying to accomplish. All they know is that they're getting the dog crap smacked out of them, and you're up here jacking threes, and running around celebrating and doing arrow signs and 3-point Google eyes, all that kind of stuff, and it bothers you. So I think this is where coaches specifically, and even the players making these accomplishments, they need to have a good read and feel of what's going on in the game and the tenor that's taking place, because you don't want, again, like I said, you don't want to ostracize yourself or really just become, all right, well, now you're just an asshole about it. You know what I mean? And I think, you don't want to risk injury as a result of somebody taking things the wrong way.
Well, my final thought about this specifically with regards to Klay Thompson. Think about it like this, though, and maybe I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit. But if you're a team, not to say that you would want to be the team that is the recipient of what Klay Thompson attempted to do, but if you're a basketball team that's watching someone shoot the basketball the way that he was shooting it, does it not kind of feel a little awe-inspiring, right? Like he's really doing something genuinely great. It's not like he's driving down the lane and everyone is just opening up, parting the Red Sea and allowing him to just dunk in the middle so he could just go and get this quote unquote unachievable record. I mean, he's shooting the basketball, which in many respects, regardless if there's someone with a hand in your face or isn't with a hand in your face, especially when you think about Klay Thompson and how he shoots the basketball and the way he shoots the basketball, it's a remarkable feat. And I think sometimes even the players, I think, have to look at it from that kind of perspective. Like when Michael Jordan had that remarkable run in the finals, where he shot those threes consecutively, and he just threw and set the record, and he threw his shrugged his shoulders like, what? Yeah, that's because what he was doing in many people's regards is just like, damn, man, is there anything that you can't do, Air Jordan, your airness, your highness? You know what I'm saying? Like there was a level of greatness to it that even the opposing basketball team had to look at it and appreciate it. And it was still in the throes of a competitive basketball game. So even though it was a blowout, I still think that because it was Klay shooting the basketball, I think where it gets lost in translation is because everybody wanted Klay to shoot the basketball.
I'll close with this, final story, and I think it's just this. We need to respect the game at all levels. And so not in the NBA, me and a friend of mine were playing ball one time. So 2-on-2 versus, another group. Long story short, we felt we had the competitive advantage. We felt we were better than them. So we're playing, a couple of series. So I score a couple points, whatever like that. We win X, Y, and Z. My partner comes up to me, says, "Hey, you know what? Let's see if we could, win with just me scoring or just you scoring." I can't remember even which one it was. Like it was either me or him. And we start to do that. But in that, I think it was trying to have him score. So in essence, I ended up passing up a shot that I definitely should have taken because the goal was to try to make him score. And in reality, that was disrespectful to the game. It was and disrespectful to our opponents. And I had never seen people play harder once they figured it out. The other guy was like, "Oh, I think they're trying to just have such and such score right now. All right." And they dug in, man. And they were so pissed off. And we had to abort mission, and luckily we still won, things of that nature. And that's not what's important. The important thing is like even in hindsight now, we were just trying to do something that's kind of goofy, and he thought something for us. It ended up being very disrespectful. And I think that's just a lesson learned that can be learned across all of basketball. Always respect your opponent, and respect the game for what it is.
Most definitely. And so we'll end on this note. What do you think are some of the unwritten rules that tend to get avoided or get thrown under the bus, so to speak? We'd love to hear from you. Be sure to get at us at NBA Baseline. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Drop.
Coast to coast,
coast to coast.
Time to go coast to coast discussing the news in the association. You ready to rock and roll, Mr. Shaw?
Absolutely, man. Let's rock.
All right. And if people don't know, man, you will know at some point, man. Big three team trade alert between the Milwaukee Bucks, the Washington Wizards, and the Cleveland Cavaliers. The Milwaukee Bucks get George Hill, Jason Smith, and the Wizards' 2021 second-round pick. The Cleveland Cavaliers get Matthew Dellavedova. Welcome back, Matty. They also get center John Henson, along with the 2021 first and second-round draft picks from Milwaukee. And then the Washington Wizards get Sam Decker, and they also get Sam Decker from Cleveland via Milwaukee, and a swapped second-round draft pick with the Cleveland Cavaliers. Basically, what the hell does all this amount to?
I don't think it amounts to much for the Wizards, which is just a poignant point of this regular season for them. I'm sure there's some salary implications that'll take place, and that's the main reason they did it. I think the biggest winner in this trade is Milwaukee. They get basically Malcolm Brogdon and then veteran in George Hill. I think their games are very, very similar. And Hill goes to Milwaukee now as a guy who can defend, fit right into Coach Bud's system, and do a lot of the things that are necessary for that roster. The biggest thing, though, is that his contract is expiring, so it frees him up, gets him out of Henson's deal, gets him out of Delly's deal as well too. So they get a better player. And also the opportunity to be players in free agency next summer. Cleveland, they get Henson. Hopefully they can turn him around. He can be somebody who can back up Tristan Thompson / Kevin Love when he comes back. And Henson himself comes back, because he's going to be out for foreseeable portion. I hope
that timeout though, Shaw. He hope he gets to eat a lot. Especially like around in the holidays, eat a lot, man. Gorge, man. You know what I'm saying? Got to put some weight on that body, bro. Got to put some weight on that body.
No doubt. And I think Delly, again, just being a guy who started his career there, and maybe he can, be a veteran presence for College Sexton in the way that maybe George Hill wasn't. And nothing against George Hill. I just don't get the warm and fuzzies, from Hill in terms of being a guy
who warm and fuzzies from George Hill.
A guy who's just going to mentor another player. And I could be wrong.
The only person that gets the warm fuzzies from George Hill is his wife. That's it. That's everybody else, man. They're just like
All right, next topic.
Yeah. All right. Out in Miami, Goran Dragic is ready to return. Miami Heat undoubtedly has had a very disappointing first quarter of the season. Does Goran Dragic's return help kind of spice things up down there in Miami?
Yeah, they have some issues with Whiteside yet again, but Dragic is a guy who's pretty much stable for them. They know what they're going to get, in that 15 to 16 point range, 5-6 assists, and just is a veteran presence at that point guard position. So I think anything that can right the ship for them, and especially with the player Dragic, who's he's steady, and that's going to be important for Spoelstra and the system that they're trying to run down there in Miami.
All right, out in Detroit, Ish Smith, groin injury. He's going to be out 3 to 6 weeks. How bad is that, and can Dwayne Casey's boys stay the course?
Yeah, I think they will, but it is going to put some more playmaking responsibilities, even more so, on Blake Griffin, who I have been watching some of the games, and he really is like legit the point guard. He's getting rebounds, or people looking for him after they get the rebound and giving it to him, and he's dribbling it up the court and initiating offense. So I think without Ish to kind of take that secondary ball handling role Blake gets more of an opportunity to do that. And then, maybe a guy like Jose Calderon will play some spot minutes as well, too. But I wouldn't rely on that. I think Blake's going to be the main guy alongside Reggie Jackson, quote unquote, as well, too. The point guards.
Isn't it funny? It should be like, Reggie Jackson should be the guy alongside Blake Griffin. But Blake Griffin is the guy alongside Reggie Jackson. Just saying, man. I'm just saying. You talking about me calling out George Hill with the warm and fuzzies. Okay. Awesome show altogether, Shaw, man. Great topics we broke down and we got on the drop, man. Great stuff, man. It's really remarkable, how quickly the news headlines generates in the course of an NBA week, man. It's just like your head turns like The Exorcist.
Absolutely. It's been an amazing show once again. I hope all our fans and listeners enjoyed it. Before we sign off as well, too, want to shout out Spencer Dinwiddie. Was on our show over the summer. He teased what he was going to be doing, but he's released his own shoe. He's really designed it himself. He talked about that, on our show as well, too. But now it's actually out. So you can go on his Instagram or his Twitter page and find out all the deets on that, man. Great concept designs. He's got, stuff that for the anime folks, got stuff for the hip hop folks, of course, for the basketball folks. So shouts to Dinwiddie, man, for getting his own sneaker line off the ground, man. This is a huge deal. And as always, man, shouts to you for being a great host of the Baseline NBA podcast.
Most definitely. Once again, we'd like to thank you and yours for tuning on and hopping on with us for the last hour. For the Baseline, Cali, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys, each and every single one of you. We'll catch up with you next time.